Hi, this is David Heine from Aspect Art. We're here today in Rotterdam at Boijmans Museum. With us today is Karl Schampers, who is the curator of a very large Paul Klee exhibition, which features primarily drawings and some paintings, of course, that focus on the mask of mythology, which was a recurring theme throughout Paul Klee's career as a painter. So join us now for Paul Klee in Rotterdam. Karl, we're here today at Boijmans for a show of Paul Klee, which is primarily made up of drawings, rarely seen, at least for me, and I've looked at a lot of Paul Klee. Could you tell us what the show is about?
The show is about Paul Klee, but then, let's say, focused on the theme of mythological stories. So the title of the exhibition is The Mask of Myth. We called it the Mask of Myth because not only because that Paul Klee used mythological stories throughout his whole life. I mean, the exhibition starts in 1901 and ends in 1940, and we have here 120 drawings and paintings dedicated and focused on mythological themes. I believe in total it is about 250-300 drawings and paintings dedicated to that theme. But it is also because not only that he used that kind of theme throughout his whole life, but it is also a kind of something that he could translate himself in the figures of mythological persons, God, half-gods, heroes, things like that. So often it is something as a kind of a jump for his own imagination that he used the mythological theme as a mask to translate something of himself in a mythological theme.
Now, as I was saying, you don't see a lot of his drawings, and you see exhibitions primarily focusing on his paintings. In your exhibition, how did the drawings themselves develop from his early career to the end? I think you've covered the whole chronology of his career.
That's more or less true. I mean, what I like in Paul Klee is that he has, it is an artist with an enormous freedom. It is without any boundaries. It is a kind of kaleidoscopic travel, a journey throughout everything that's possible. Not only in styles, but also in imagination and also different techniques. What I like in this exhibition is that you have one red line, that is the myth, the mythological, the classical mythological. And besides that, you see how he is jumping from one style to another, how he is discovering and searching for all kinds of new possibilities. So it starts with very refined, in 1901, very refined etchings, where he has figured himself as God Hermes. You see after that it becomes a little bit childish. Leda and the swan, and you see that the swan has become a very little duck with two enormous big eyes. Then 2 or 3 years later you see the barbarian Venus, which is a kind of a contrast between Pallas Athene, Venus, the god of beauty, but then in the figuration of a barbaric woman. So it is a kind of monstrous combination of beauty and ugliness. But at the same time, it is the most incredible subtle color that you can imagine. Then a couple of years later, then it is only a very line drawings. A year after that, or a couple of years later, in 33, you have that kind of curly, a little bit meshy drawings. Then in 37, suddenly it becomes very Picasso-like, with enormous big lines, outlines, focused on forms. So everything that is possible in terms of art is in the work of Klee. And I guess that that's something that is not understood in his own time. Then people said, oh, he is that kind of naive dreamer. He is that childish artist. And now we can see that he is a very unconventional artist. He is a man who broke through all the boundaries, who was not focused to one specific style or a group of artists. He did everything he liked. And I guess that is also a little bit also his own myth, that it is an artist without any boundaries who is very difficult to place or to pinpoint on something. And it is that kind of attitude that is so absolutely typical for 20th century art.
You spoke of Picasso as being one of the influences, or at least latter influences on him. What were some of the other influences on Klee as he developed?
I mean, yeah, that's very difficult to say. I mean, he started as a student of Franz von Stuck, who was a very famous 19th century German painter. Of course, there is a lot of relations, let's say, afterwards with people like Macke or Kandinsky, Jawlensky. They formed also. They were companions in terms of the Blaue Reiter, the group of the Blaue Reiter, who was focused in Munich. But if there is any direct relation in terms of influence, that's something that you can't see. I guess that he looked at it, and sometimes you see something like, my God, that looks like Schlemmer or something like that. But it is always that he gives his own idea, his own translation of everything that he was influenced by. The only real influence that you can see is in the late years, let's say from 37 on. Then you see the enormous influence by Picasso. And Picasso also visited him I believe it was in 37, so he was already more or less in a kind of voluntary exile in Swiss, because he escaped from Germany, where the Entartetenkunst came up, and the National Socialists started to declare his art as entartet. That Picasso visited him in 37 in Bern, and that is the year that Picasso painted his beautiful masterpiece Guernica. And there you see also the enormous attention to form and not to painting. And that's what you see so clearly in the exhibition, the transition of Paul Klee as a painter to Paul Klee more as a sculptor.
Now, early on, as I walked through the exhibition, as you said, you see a very fine drawing of him behind a mask, metaphoric for the entire exhibition in some way. But then he went on a trip to Africa, as I recall. Did this have a big influence on his art?
Yeah, I mean, you can't see it that clearly in here. But it has an enormous influence in his art. He went there together with Mark, and he visited Tunisia and North Africa. And there the color, the light, but completely unexpected colors that we don't have in our European spectrum. That's something that he discovered. And we have a couple of examples of what you see immediately, the transition of the line and, let's say, the more the graphite quality of the work into an enormous colorful work. But we have only a couple of examples here. You see it more clearly in let's say, in the paintings. And you see it also in the work of Matisse. When Matisse went to his Tunis travel, then also you see immediately the enormous influence of light, the brightness of the sun, the completely different scala of colors that he experienced in North Africa.
Now, you've chosen to primarily focus on Paul Klee's work in drawing, which is, I think, quite unusual. As a drawer or tekener, how did he rate with his contemporaries at the Bauhaus and other places like that?
I guess that as a drawer, he was more or less like an exception. Most of the artists were so focused on painting, or at the Bauhaus it went more. It was the combination of modern technique and art. So you see all kinds of combinations with architecture, with design. Schlemmer with his Bühnebilder, the theater pieces, his dance. I guess that Paul Klee was one of the exceptions who still continued making drawings. Although it is in, let's say, in after 1925 he made less drawings, but still he was making drawings every day. I mean, his complete oeuvre is about more than 8,000 works. So when you count it on 40 years of working, that's enormous. That is, I mean, also with some paintings, they took a long time because they are very refined, very precise. And his drawings, you see that it's done without any hesitation. That is an immediate translation of his ideas into his hand. There is not something in between. And I guess that's also what he has in common with Picasso. That is the immediate transition of ideas into his hand.
Now, as I view the rooms here, it seems that his drawings become more free as he grows older, as often is the case with artists. When he works in the theme of mythology, is this a common theme that he's taken from the early, very latter? Is this a common theme throughout his life?
Yeah. He worked, I mean, it is not only that it was a common theme in terms of his work. You see also we researched his library, and then you see that he was reading the Greek drama writers, also the Livius, Virgil, all those kind, also the Italian writers, the Roman. And he made all kinds of annotations to it. He made small drawings. So that focus on classical literature and also mythological themes is not only, let's say, a privilege for him as an artist in terms of the drawings or the paintings, but it is also something that he continued in terms of reading. So it is not something that is by accident.
I once read in some of Joseph Campbell's work that he considered Paul Klee a primary artistic example of archetypal manifestations that come out of the unconscious. Do you find that as you look at his drawings?
It is not unconscious. I mean, of course, Paul Klee always said that art is not about making something visible, but to make it visible. It is not that you want to represent the visible, but you want to make it visible. And that's something that with Paul Klee, that he was not so focused in terms of the high art ideas, that like most of the artists we go back to the Renaissance or the Gothic or Baroque or something like that. He was much more interested in the art of the Middle Ages or the very early Italian artists like Giotto, or African sculptures or drawings by children, because that was his idea of that's pure, that's honest, that is direct, that is not spoiled by all kinds of ideas. That has the most immediate attractive power that you can imagine. So in that respect, I guess that it is that some people think of him as a kind of a childish dreamer. But it is more that what he likes in let's say, in drawings by children, is the immediacy, the pureness. The same like, I guess that's also why Klee was an enormous influence on the Dutch poet and painter and drawer Lucebert. And also the Cobra, who
adopted his childlike mannerism.
Yeah.
Now, in looking at a lot of Paul Klee's paintings, which more people are familiar with than his drawings, Is there a relationship between the drawings and his paintings? Were they done as primary sketches for the for the paintings, or were they sort of something that was exclusive of the painting?
It was, I mean, we have only a couple of drawings that you can see as a kind of a sketch for a painting. But it was something that he did, constantly. But it was not meant to be a sketch or a preliminary sketch for a painting. It had its own value. It was independent of, let's say, the paintings.